I'm Jesse Ventura. Stay vigilant, question more. Welcome to my world. Come along for the ride. The world according to Jesse. This week, we celebrate Thanksgiving in America. All across the nation, families are eating giant meals, saying grace and counting their blessings. But the Thanksgiving story we're taught in school is a whitewashed version of reality. The origins of the first Thanksgiving between European settlers and Native Americans was not as peaceful as we've been led to believe. The truth behind this American tradition is much more sinister. Today, we reveal the real history of Thanksgiving. So sit tight. The show starts now. The world according to Jesse.
Hello and welcome to The World According to Jesse. I'm Brigida Santos. Thanksgiving was originally deemed a holiday in 1637 by John Winthrop, the governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony. On that day, Native Americans and Pilgrims sat down in modern-day Connecticut to share a meal. That part is true. But according to historians, settlers from 4 New England colonies spent the previous year engaged in a brutal war with a tribe called the Pequot Nation. At the time, the Pequot maintained military, political, and economic control of the region, including control of the valuable fur and wampum trades. Their dominance posed a problem for European settlers who had come to the New World to colonize, as well as to other local native groups. Competing tribes resented the power structure, so they allied with the English. At first, the Pequot fought well, but over time they began to lose. The war ended when 700 Pequot were massacred. William Bradford, then governor of Massachusetts, chronicled the details in his History of the Plymouth Plantation. Governor John Winthrop declared every day after the raid a day of Thanksgiving for subduing the tribe. And out of the genocide, a holiday was born. So what do you think about the revisionist history that we're taught in schools? Did you know about this history?
No, Brigida, I certainly did not. It's eye-opening. But then again, as time goes on, and I'm 66 years old now, I'm seeing it more and more, not just only about Thanksgiving, but about a whole lot of other things that we're not told, we're not taught in classrooms. Everything is scrubbed, everything is this and that. It kind of reminds me, if we go backwards a little bit, to those JFK documents. A lot of it's redacted. They don't tell you the truth in school about how things went down. I remember there was a coup d'etat was attempted on President Roosevelt by Wall Street. You can't read about that in school. I knew nothing about that until I did my book, Conspiracy Theory. And that's when I learned that this event had actually occurred, because school tends to censor. They teach you only what they want you to know about our history, and if the history happens to be bad, chances are you're not going to know about it.
Were you taught in history class about Christopher Columbus sailing to the New World, and now that you're a grown adult, what do you think about that story?
Well, it was interesting. They taught us that Columbus came here to the New World and he thought he had arrived in India, because allegedly that's what he was looking to do, was find a new way to India for trade and all that. And that's allegedly how the word Indian came about. When he landed here, he that the people, he called them Indians because he thought they were in India. And then lo and behold, as time goes on, you think it's wonderful, because the day Columbus discovered America, well, how do you discover something unless you're looking at it from a European point of view? There were already people here. This place already had people living here, indigenous people. So he didn't discover nothing. But we were told he discovered it and life was wonderful. Today you find out this guy was horrible. And the things he did to the Native Americans here on his discovery of, quote, the New World was nothing simply but an invasion. Columbus led the invasion of North America.
Now, this doesn't just apply to the United States. In fact, if you look at the history of civilization, it is the history of genocide. Look at the Roman Empire, which is now considered one of the greatest civilizations of all time. What do you think about that fact?
Well, it's true, and we're following the road of the Roman Empire, the road they took. You know, we're all into entertainment. We got wars happening all around the world. It's bankrupting our country. If anyone would actually look at the Roman Empire and apply it to the United States today, the parallels are scary.
That's right. Now, the Roman Empire lasted only 500 years, and America is about half as old as Rome was when it fell. Do you think that the United States is going to suffer the same fate? What would it take for us to not suffer that fate?
Well, they always tell you if you don't read history, you're doomed to repeat it, right? And it just seems to me we're not studying the Roman Empire to learn what they did wrong. We seem to be following the Roman Empire, to a T. We're following their playbook. Now, I can't foresee the future. I don't know if the United States will go down that road and fall, but we certainly are heading in that direction, and somebody needs to change direction of this country, or I think very well we could end up like the Roman Empire. 500 years, and we may then drop to the bottom rather than rising to the top. The scary thing for me, Brigida, is the feelings I get today that the United States has seen its best days. I never had that as a kid. I always felt our best days were still in front of us, but today I'm starting to believe our best days may be behind us. The world according to Jesse.
Indigenous territories encompass 22% of Earth's land surface and coincide with up to 80% of the planet's biodiversity. Yet native lands are under attack. While some laws do protect these lands, big energy projects like the Dakota Access Pipeline and climate change undermine these protections. Because of rising sea levels and land subsidence, Native Americans are now becoming climate refugees. But the people are fighting back, not only on behalf of Native Americans, but on behalf of all humankind. Some of these people include the Youth Climate Interveners, a group of 13 young activists from Minnesota who are now taking on Enbridge Energy. A judge recently granted them the right to represent parties in the contested Enbridge pipeline case. The proposed $7.5 billion pipeline would run across the northern part of Minnesota. These millennials argue that their generation will suffer the most if the project moves forward. So they have now joined 5 indigenous tribes and several organizations in the fight. Governor, what would you tell these young activists from your home state?
I would tell them they're doing exactly what I say on the end of every one of my shows. They're being vigilant. There is nothing wrong with protest in the United States of America. It's supposed to be protected by our First Amendment rights, that we have the right to petition our government if we think we're being violated or we're upset or whatever it might be. I say hip, hip, hooray to them. And as far as a quick message to our government, why do we continue to spend all our resources on fossil fuel when it's a fuel of the past? We should be looking to that big disk in the sky up there called the sun. It's not going to burn out for another 4.5 billion years. That's where we need to go, not into the earth anymore. It's old and it's archaic.
So why is it so hard to protect native lands from these projects? Wouldn't it be in America's best interest to preserve these lands?
Brigida, it's called money. M-O-N-E-Y. Show me the money. It is all about money. That's the bottom line. Oil companies have all sorts of money. They continue to have all sorts of money. They hold our elected politicians in a chokehold because of the money, and they need the money to make to prosper. Look like the other pipeline, the one that was going to run all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico because Canada wouldn't allow it to go through British Columbia. Well, they tell us it's for us, No, it wasn't. It was being run down there so they could load up oil down there and take it throughout the world. Remember something, oil companies are not national companies, they are international companies. All they care about is making money, and they have no loyalty to one country or the other as long as they prosper from it.
All right, as a Minnesotan, what do you think about this proposed Line 3 expansion? Now, this pipeline would go from Alberta, Canada to Superior, Wisconsin, and it would replace an outdated pipeline along that same route. Now, Enbridge is a Canadian fossil fuel giant that has a history of spills and leaks at these facilities. What do you think about this?
Well, I think that it's going to continue. And not only that, but aren't these oil pipelines perfect targets for terrorism? Absolutely they are. We should be investing in the future, not the past. We need to be investing into outer space, into energy from the sun. You know, Tesla automobiles, I hope they succeed, because that gets us off the dependency of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are ancient, they are archaic, and it's time for our society to move above and beyond them, and the only way it's going to happen is to stop things like these pipelines from going through. Because the point of the pipelines isn't to help you or I. The point of the pipelines is so they can load up ships and sell internationally throughout the world. It has nothing to do with energy in America. It's got solely to do with big oil companies making big money and going anywhere they have to go to get their fossil fuel oil.
So is this why you think that these older politicians don't seem to care as much as young people about climate change?
Oh, I think it's totally about greed. It's all about money. When you go back to the famous All the President's Men, where Woodward meets with Deep Throat in the bowels of the parking ramp, what does he get told to him? Follow the money. Anytime you want to learn anything about government decisions or what's the active force playing in these decisions, rest assured, 99.9% of the time, it's going to have to do with money. Follow the money. This is big money. Politicians get paid off. Democrats and Republicans create a system based upon bribery. If you don't bribe them with money, you get no audience. So the old politicians know this bankrolls them to keep them in their jobs, to keep them where they continue to get elected over and over and over again. It's all about the money, and it always will be about the money.
All right, it's time for a break. When we return, the governor sits down with a Native American activist for more on the real history of Thanksgiving.
According to Jesse.
Here's what people have been saying about Redacted tonight.
Give it to us.
Redacted is full-on awesome. The only show I go out of my way to watch every week. It really packs a punch. Lee Camp is the John Oliver of RT America.
You guys do have the same accent.
Hey, we are apparently better than boobs.
Nothing's better than boobs.
You see, people you've never heard of love Redacted tonight. The president of the World Bank, though, hates it.
Well, he doesn't really have any taste.
Seriously, he sent us an email.
You're watching an RT America special report.
Man, it ain't about him. It's about you. It's about me. It's about everybody.
Basically, everything that you think you know about civil society had broken down.
There's always going to be somebody else one step ahead of the game.
We should not be in the business of normalizing violence.
We don't need people that think like this on our planet.
This is an incredibly tense situation.
What's going on in your city, in your streets? Never back down like Tyrell, and the truth is what you seek. To analyze, investigate from the bottom to the top. You speak your mind like Sean Stone, whether they like it or not. I got Tabitha, Miss Wallace, with the wisdom and the pearl. Between the outrage and the evidence, what's going on in this world? Watching the hawks, watching the hawks, watching the hawks. Listen when they talk.
The world according to Jesse. Simon Moya Smith is the former culture editor of Indian Country. He is an Oglala, Lakota, and Chicano activist, and he's a journalist. I spoke to him earlier. The world according to Jesse. You're going to destroy Thanksgiving for me today and give me the real history on what Thanksgiving is from the Native American perspective?
That's what I'm going to do.
Okay, lay it on me. I mean, we've been told that this was like a powwow between the new people that arrived here and the Native Americans, and they all shared meal and everything was wonderful. And now you're going to tell me that that isn't quite the truth, huh?
No, it's not quite the truth. See, that's the problem, is when people tell the Thanksgiving narrative, they tell a kind of whitewashed mythological narrative. What really happened was when the English came here, when the pilgrims, quote-unquote pilgrims, came here, they had come to an area that was already ravaged by disease. A lot of natives had already died from disease and pestilence because of the Spanish settlement. So the story is that the white people came here and that they tilled the soil and et cetera. No, they didn't. They actually came to land that was already ready for farming. And what they did when they first got here, though, is they started to rob graves. They robbed graves. And then one of the stories that isn't told is that they were so eager to get gold that they invested in just digging holes anywhere. They would just dig holes and they were looking for gold instead of planting crops. So when it got cold and they got hungry, they dug up Indian graves and ate the bodies. So you have, cannibalism, you have theft, and that doesn't even go into like the brutality that they enacted upon the indigenous people, like literally killing them with guns and with poison. Now, it makes it uncomfortable for people to talk about that side of the story, the real events, because it seems like it's un-American. But, if we read Lies My Teacher Told Me by James Lowen, he goes into detail that this isn't like, it's not about feel-good history, feel-bad history. It's just about history, and it doesn't serve anybody by ignoring what really happened to the indigenous people.
So this big meal that we all have at Thanksgiving is all just propaganda.
I mean, it's propaganda. So, like, when they first got here, when white people, and again, I'm going to say this, and it shocks a lot of people, these were invaders. I know we like to use soft language. The United States likes to use soft language like settlers and pilgrims. But these people were invaders. They invaded our territories. And so when they got here, they didn't know how to farm. They didn't know anything about this continent, so the indigenous people helped them. They helped them to farm. They gave them clothing. They gave them shelter. So when the typical story, or the legendary story, is that when the warmer weather came, the pilgrims, it was actually the brainchild of Abraham Lincoln, who, by the way, holds a record for hanging the most Native Americans in one individual, day. He was like, we need a day to bring, everyone together, and we're going to do this. We're going to put an idea together, and why not pilgrims and Indians? But again, it's like feel-good history, just like when we read things about Christopher Columbus. He sailed the ocean blue, 1492, and nobody talks about how he would hang 13 Native Americans at a time, one for every 12 apostles and one more for Jesus Christ. So when we talk about things like Thanksgiving, we have to recognize that for us, it's not a day of Thanksgiving, it's a day of mourning, but it's also a day to remember our resilience. It's the day that we recognize that indigenous people are still here. We survived the quote-unquote pilgrims, the founding fathers, westward expansion, Christopher Columbus, boarding schools, rape, murder, genocide, theft, germ warfare, all of that. And we're the smallest racial minority in our ancestral land. And again, when people sit down to Thanksgiving, they have to remember, or I hope they remember, that even in November, that's Native American Heritage Month. It's a day to recognize that the indigenous people are still here, that we are doctors and we're lawyers and we're professors. We're not this just pan-Indian image that people like to think, that's perpetuated by sports mascots and by Halloween costumes, etc. So seeing somebody like me really throws a curve for people. They're like, well, you don't look like an Indian. And again, we have to remember that 70% of natives now live in big cities. Not all of us have long hair, and a lot of us do. We're very diverse. We're not all speaking one language, we're speaking a diversity of languages. So every Thanksgiving, it's my hope that people recognize that we're still here and don't perpetuate the lie.
Well, I can tell you, Simon, that every time the Washington football team comes to play the Minnesota Vikings, I always go out and march. I march with the Native Americans because I want that name changed. I won't even use it. I broadcasted 3 years in the NFL, 2 with Tampa Bay and 1 year with the Vikings, and I always referred to them only as Washington. I would never call them by their nickname. And in fact, I got christened a fellow warrior by some of the local powerful Native Americans here in Minnesota. So they're used to me showing up on that day, and we always march and protest on that. But why do you think it is, Simon? Why does our country continue to use propaganda and never tell us the truth in school and in our history books? What's the purpose for that? What do you think?
I mean, it's really simple. You can't be the greatest nation in the world if you're guilty of a genocide. And I've said that time and again. I'm in Manhattan, you're in Minnesota. But this is all Indian land. This is all indigenous territory. This is all native ancestral land. And if we recognize that we stole it, or the United States stole it aggressively through policy, through, again, just taking it away, through genocide, through murders, I mean, if we recognize that, it's really difficult for people to celebrate Thanksgiving. It's really difficult for people to enjoy, I guess, the idea of Thanksgiving and Independence Day and et cetera, because it's become a civil, these holidays have become a civil religion. So when you talk about indigenous peoples, people just don't really want to recognize what really happened to our people and happens today. Again, we're talking about a race of people that there's still no Native pundits on mainstream news. I still bump into people that can't name me one Native American athlete, one Native musician, one Native actor. And that's the difficult part. We're so canceled out of the American conversation because it's associated with what this country has done and is doing and will continue to do unless we're included in these conversations and focusing on the solutions. And again, people don't want to ask what is a reservation. They just want to assume they know what it is when reservations were founded as prison camps. The first prison camps in the United States were native prison camps set up by European invaders. So it's really difficult for people to recognize what has happened to us and then at the same time go and have a Thanksgiving meal and wow, this holiday's kind of a sham, and we hope that people recognize that it is a sham. It's a lie, just a blatant lie.
What do we do now to educate the white people? You know, it's time the white people get educated a little bit in this country, I think. It's not too late. We can still save us, can't we?
Yeah, and I wouldn't just say white people, I'd say America as a whole. You know, I've met African Americans who are fans of the Washington football team and don't even think that the name is a racial slur, even though it's defined as a racial slur. You know, I've seen Latinos in red face and headdress. You know, I'll be told I'm PC by someone of the LGBTQ community. It's people just don't know how to include natives in the conversation. People are still learning about who natives are and who we are today, that we didn't die out, that we're literally amongst everybody in our ancestral land. So it's about including natives in the conversation about things like police brutality. Natives are still more likely to be killed by police than any other demographic. Native women are 2.5 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than women of any other demographic. Nobody talks about these Native issues other than the Native. It's not that hard to include the Native in the conversation about things that affect all of us. So it's about no longer thinking that we're just, you know, these half-naked, Tonto-talking, you know, Indians on horseback, but we're actually your neighbor. We may live on the same block as you. Maybe we don't celebrate Thanksgiving like you, but hey, how about you come over and celebrate our resiliency?
In other words, educate yourself. Simon, I want to thank you for coming on today. It was a great history lesson. We need to get it out there. We need real history, not fabricated history. Thank you, Simon.
I agree. No, thank you.
The world according to Jesse.
All right, Governor, it's time to let our fans weigh in. Now, we asked people on Twitter, how did the first English settlers set the stage for American imperialism? Dr. Mikey Love says the drive for expansion and domination seems to have been there right from the beginning. The powerful prey on the weak or vulnerable. How do you respond?
Well, you know that's true probably in most aspects. You know, when powerful countries go out into the world, they practice colonialism, where they invade third world countries, third world nations, whatever they might be, who aren't up to par with them and don't have the weapons they have. and they literally come in and take over, and then they rape and pillage the land for money. See, it all comes back to money for the homeland, money for the invading country, money for the people who are colonializing things.
Messenger says, I doubt those first settlers had that in mind when they first landed, but being mistreated by their own leaders is probably a big part of it.
Well, I don't know about that. The word that I got and understand was when the Pilgrims came here, all they wanted to do was dig for gold. They weren't worried about feeding themselves until they started to starve. And then it was the Native Americans that taught them how to farm because they were only after gold, again, money, the quick buck. That's what you got happening. How do I make as much money as quick as I can? Well, this shows me they even used to do it back then.
So what are your final thoughts on history? How has the internet changed our perception of it? Is it helping or causing information overload? Does it allow people to get more access to what really happened in history?
Well, you know, what it does, it gives you access to anything, the internet. But the thing you got to remember, you got to use your own intelligence of what on the internet you're going to believe and what you're not, because there's no rule that you're getting the truth or not. So it really comes back to each and every one of us as an individual to ensure to check out. If you read something on the internet, find out about it. Look to other ways to learn about it, and hopefully you will be told the truth. But always be wary. There is no governance of the internet. You can say anything you want on there pretty well, and naturally people, if they hear something, they automatically think it's true when it may not necessarily be that way.
That's all we have time for. Thanks for tuning in. Tell us what you think about the whitewashing of history on Facebook and Twitter. Next week, we're talking to a CIA whistleblower about the art of threat creation and the new Red Scare.
Americans are afraid of Russians again. You don't say. I guess we always need a boogeyman to keep the military-industrial complex in business. We'll be talking about all this and more next week. And remember, when the government lies, the truth becomes a traitor. Until then, stay vigilant. I'm Jesse Ventura. Stay vigilant and question more.
Welcome to my world. Come along for the ride.
The world according to Jesse.